Hello again, Guardians. Profane here. Thanks for checking out the video. Getting an exotic weapon drop from a raid or dungeon in Destiny 2 can be an incredibly exciting and memorable experience, whether you are lucky enough to get one on your first or 50th clear. It's an extremely prestigious accomplishment, and it's one that's usually followed up with monstrous applause. Many of these weapons are looked at as game-changing weapons that offer some of the most unique traits and feature some of the most astonishing designs. Over the course of more than 7 years, there has been 17 different raids and dungeons released in Destiny 2 with 16 exotic weapons. The newest of these is the Strand Trace Rifle, called the Navigator, and the oldest, the Legend of Acrius. Today we attempt to rank all 16 of these exotics to determine which are truly the best in their class and worthy of being farmed and owned by you. Before we begin, it's worth mentioning that while many of these exotics are still acquired from their original sources, there are some, like the Tarrabah for example, that have now been reallocated into the exotic kiosk at the tower, since its associated raid is no longer available. Additionally, there are some exotics, like the Wishender and Divinity, that are not earned at random, but instead earned through exotic quests. But since they are still tied into their respective raid or dungeon, we are still including them in today's ranking. We will be judging these exotics with 3 fields of focus. First, the weapon's overall performance in the current sandbox. Second, the aesthetics of the exotic, how good it looks, because that drip is always importante. And third, the fun factor. Let's be real, we're all kids at heart. That's why we play video games, so it should be no surprise that we want to be oohed and awed by our favorite weapons as we're showing them off to our best friends. With that being said, let's get started, and we're starting with the newest exotic, the Navigator, available through the Ghost of the Deep dungeon. This trace rifle provides great synergy when using Strand. It provides you and allies with woven mail, and it severs enemies on sustained damage. While it doesn't deal as much damage as other trace rifles, it does provide great support towards your team's survivability. Since its catalyst can leave behind grapple points, the Navigator can offer some unique maneuverability advantages, and with its sleek design, this trace rifle earns top-tier marks across the board. Next up, we have the Conditional Finality. This stasis shotgun is available through Root of Nightmares and provides its wielder with a unique double barrel setup that features a solar barrel that will ignite targets and a stasis barrel that will freeze targets. This shotgun is by far one of the most beautiful weapons in Destiny. Its unique intrinsic trait makes it a dominating force when going up against bosses and champions, but it is limited to only 2 rounds in the magazine, and its range is not very optimal. There's also no catalyst that could improve on these issues. While the Conditional Finality gets an S tier ranking towards its aesthetics and towards its fun factor, it falls short just slightly in performance, putting it at an A tier for functionality. Moving on, we have the Hierarchy of Needs, a solar bow that comes from Spire of the Watcher. This bow functions more like the Tiku's Divination, but in reverse. It creates large solar rings that amplifies the damage of your arrows while giving them tracking abilities. This bow looks stunning. I love the way Bungie incorporated the aesthetics of Rasputin and the War Mines into this bow, but sadly, its performance really leaves a lot to be desired. If it incorporated some of the Solar 3.0 verbiage, then maybe this would be a better performing exotic. But in its current condition, this bow gets a B tier ranking at best. Up next, the Collective Obligation. This pulse rifle is featured in the Vow of the Disciple and was one of the first exotics to include Void 3.0 verbiage into its weapon traits. This exotic takes Void debuffs that are applied to enemies and converts that into energy that's used in its alternate mode, which then applies those same debuffs back onto those enemies. While its benefits are incredibly top-notch, it's still considered a niche weapon, as its functionality limits its wielder to void builds. Nevertheless, this is an incredibly beautiful weapon. It's easy to use, and it's exceptionally powerful, earning it a solid S tier ranking across the board. And now the Heartshadow exotic sword. This comes from the Duality dungeon. The Heartshadow is breathtaking, looking like something straight out of Hellraiser. By far one of the coolest looking swords in Destiny, and it provides you with some pretty interesting abilities as well, as this sword will cause its wielder to become invisible after heavy attacks. Striking an enemy with a charged heavy attack causes weakening effects, and when coming out of invisibility, this weapon deals bonus damage. Since swords just haven't found their sweet spot within the current sandbox, it's hard to devote yourself towards an exotic sword that's not the Lament. But even still, this sword has some incredible benefits that can work out pretty well with a lot of niche builds. While it gets an S tier ranking for vanity and fun factor, the Heartshadow falls down to A tier because of its performance in the current sandbox. Moving on, we've got the Touch of Malice, which I'll be honest in saying is an exotic I still have not been able to get. This is a return exotic that is featured in the King's Fall raid. This weapon offers a unique risk and reward playstyle, as its intrinsic trait will damage its wielder as it gets bonus damage. In a way, this is very similar to how Tommy's matchbook works. While the benefits of Touch of Malice are substantial, the risk of damaging oneself to the brink of death is not a welcoming thought for many Guardians, which is why this exotic is considered to be extremely niche. Nevertheless, the Touch of Malice is a beautiful weapon with very powerful abilities, which earn it a solid A tier ranking across the board. Up next, we have the Eyes of Tomorrow, available through the Deepstone Crypt. Eyes of Tomorrow is a rocket launcher that fires a volley of rockets that tracks down its enemies. There were some recent adjustments to this trait, and now defeating 4 targets with this volley will reload the magazine and increase the damage of the next volley. Not quite the change needed to really cause this exotic to propel in the sandbox, but it is significantly better than it once was. Overall, the Eyes of Tomorrow is pretty subpar. It gets outperformed by many different legendary rocket launchers, and it honestly doesn't even look that badass, especially considering it comes from the Deepstone Crypt, which features some of the most visually pleasing legendary weapons in this game. So because of this, the Eyes of Tomorrow gets a big fat D. Next up, one of the most iconic weapons in Destiny's long history, the Gjallarhorn. This exotic rocket launcher was made available once again through the Grasp of Avarice dungeon. This weapon is so well known that people who don't even play Destiny still know about the Gjallarhorn. This is one of those weapons that you could just stare at for hours. It's elegant and it's powerful. It's not quite the Killmonger that it once was, but it still is one of the best exotics in this game, rightfully earning it a spot as an S tier exotic. Moving on, we've got the Divinity, one of the first weapons to include champion specific functionality. The Divinity has been a featured weapon in several World's First raid teams, as it debuffs targets, increasing the potential damage output for the entire team. While this weapon has been nerfed to the ground in recent months, the Divinity still holds strong as being a top tier weapon for many Grandmasters, dungeons, and raids. While it might not be the most amazing exotic to look at, the Divinity's functionality is incredible. It's beyond top tier, resulting in this exotic getting a triumphant S tier ranking. Up next is the Xenophage, a nail driver of a heavy machine gun associated to the Pit of Heresy dungeon. At one point, the Xenophage was one of the highest DPSing weapons in the entire sandbox, but it's seen its fair share of nerfs. The Xenophage still finds itself as a top tier choice for invaders in Gambit, but it just doesn't quite hit the mark in raids and other in-game content. Even still, this is an incredibly powerful and elegant weapon, earning it a respectable A tier ranking. And now the Wishender. This bow is tied to the Shattered Throne. It allows its wielder to see through walls with arrows that overpenetrate enemies. It can pierce barrier shields and deals bonus damage against the Taken. Over the last few seasons, the Wishender has become one of the top choices to use in Master and Grandmaster Nightfalls. But that's really where this bow's usefulness starts and ends, as it gets outperformed by many other bows while in any other activity. I recently made the mistake though when publishing a separate video where I ranked all of the exotic bows, and I announced that I felt the Wish Ender was an A tier bow, which seemed to piss a lot of people off. So, learning from my mistake, we are still ranking the Wish Ender as an A tier exotic, not an S tier. Sorry, not sorry. And now, let's talk about the 1K voices. This heavy fusion rifle is available through the Last Wish raid, and while it's extremely pleasing to watch enemies get dismantled by the explosions that this weapon causes, it's sadly just not a very practical weapon in the current sandbox, especially since you can easily blow yourself up when using it. It did receive a recent update though that provides solar verbiage, and it gives the 1K the ability to cause ignitions, which can stun unstoppables, which it does vastly improve the overall performance of this exotic, but just not enough to really make a difference in the current sandbox. From an aesthetic viewpoint, this weapon is breathtaking, but when it comes to performance, it's just fairly lackluster, bringing its overall score down to a B ranking. Next up, the Vex Mythoclast, another immensely well-known exotic, and another returning exotic from Destiny 1, available through the Vault of Glass. This is an amazing Vex-themed fusion rifle, and it's truly one of a kind, as it functions like an auto rifle with an alternate firing mode that functions like a hobgoblin sniper. This weapon is incredibly powerful and very fun to use, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Even after several nerfs to its overall damage, this weapon will still slap in the PvP or in PvE, which makes it even more surprising that more Guardians are not using this exotic. Overall, the Mythoclast gets an honorable S tier ranking. The final 3 exotics that we discussed today are the oldest raid exotics in Destiny 2 and are all now available through the exotic kiosk. The Tarrabah Solar SMG, the Legend of Acrius Heavy Shotgun, and the Anarchy Heavy Grenade Launcher. Originally rewarded from the Crown of Sorrow, the Tarrabah is an exotic that never truly lived up to its full potential. Anytime it's moved forward in the sandbox, it has been met with a nerf. On paper, this looks like an amazing SMG that would rip through PvE content, but sadly, it's outperformed by many legendary weapons, and even in PvP, there are far more reliable options, which result in this exotic receiving a very subpar C tier ranking. The Legend of Acrius is in a very similar boat. Originally available through the Leviathan raid, it's an incredibly powerful shotgun, but it's been undermined by several nerfs and several sandbox adjustments that ultimately just didn't favor this exotic. Personally, I love the performance of this shotgun, but that's not something that you really get to enjoy until after unlocking its catalyst, which takes forever, and the lack of Arc 3.0 verbiage has really held this weapon back from being a greater force than it currently is. While it still looks extremely badass, the Legend of Acrius gets a C tier ranking. And last but not least is the Anarchy. This heavy arc grenade launcher was originally available through the Scourge of the Past, and it's been a dominating force at several different points in Destiny 2's history, especially against raid bosses. But with its lack of Arc 3.0 verbiage, the Anarchy has started to take the slippery slope down, resulting in this grenade launcher getting a B tier ranking. And with that, we have successfully ranked all 16 of the dungeon and raid exotics that are currently available in Destiny 2 Lightfall. I'd love to hear your thoughts on these exotics, which one is your favorite, and how you would rank all of these exotics. Let me know in the comments down below. That's going to wrap things up for today's video. If you enjoyed and would like to see more Destiny ranked videos, then be sure to hit that like button below, along with the subscribe button if you're new, and let me know what rank videos you would like to see in the future. Thank you as always for checking out the video, and until next time, this has been Profane, wishing you all some happy hunting.